Warning: if you've ever lied to your parents about having a boyfriend, this story will give you chills. She's Lily Anderson, a successful and happy designer in New York. He's Jake, an unemployed actor she hired for Waller to play the perfect boyfriend for Christmas. Lily thought she was the director of this perfect charade, until she discovered Jake is actually Jacob Thorne, the mysterious billionaire who owns her entire hometown. And, it seems, he didn't show up by accident. This isn't a simple rental contract. This is a targeted pursuit. Disclaimer: this channel features fictional psychological stories created for emotional exploration and storytelling purposes. All characters and events are fictional. The perfect lie always starts with the best intentions. Lily Anderson's lie, however, started with a live stream and 20 pounds of Italian sausage. Her digital persona, Lily of the Valley, freelance design guru and advocate for blissful, independent singledom, was in full, polished flow. In her Brooklyn apartment, backdropped by tastefully exposed brick and a thriving fiddle-leaf fig, she smiled at the camera. And that's why choosing your own peace isn't selfish. It's essential. It's the ultimate form of self-respect. The comment section of her 5,000 viewers scrolled with heart emojis and "Yes, Queen" affirmations. It felt solid. It felt true. Until her phone, propped right beside the streaming screen, erupted with the custom ringtone she'd set for her mother. "You are my sunshine." Lily's smile tightened. Ignore it. So, when family pressures mount during the holidays, remember your boundaries are... The ringing stopped. A second later, a video call notification splashed across her streaming monitor, visible to everyone. Mom. Video call. A collective digital gasp seemed to ripple through the live stream. Comments paused, then accelerated. Answer it. Is that Mama Lily? Boundaries, sis, show us. Panicked, her finger fumbled. She meant to hit decline. She hit accept video. Her mother's kindly, worry-lined face filled a half her screen. Lily! Honey, can you hear me? Mary Anderson's voice, warm and loud and utterly oblivious, boomed into Lily's studio-quality microphone. I've already made 20 pounds of Italian sausage for Mark. You remember to bring him home early for Christmas, okay? We need time to properly roast it. The silence in the live stream was absolute, a vacuum of stunned disbelief. Then, the comments exploded. Mark? Who the hell is Mark? I thought she was single, queen of boundaries. And secret boyfriends? Exposed. Lily felt the blood drain from her face, pooling somewhere cold in her feet. Her fingers went numb. Her carefully curated world of control and independence shattered with the casual mention of fermented meat and a fictional man. Mom, I'm she choked out, but Mary, with a cheerful, "Bye, honey," had already hung up. The pixelated faces in her chat blurred. The Lily of the Valley facade cracked, revealing just Lily, 32, mortified, and caught in a lie she'd spun months ago to stop the pitying looks during a weekly check-in. Yes, Mom, I'm seeing someone. His name is Mark. He's in tech. Very busy. Very successful. A harmless, distant fiction. until now. I have to go, she whispered to the camera, her voice thin as paper. Family emergency. Thank you, everyone. She stabbed the end stream button. The screen went black, reflecting her own pale, horrified expression. Her phone buzzed immediately, not with her mother, but with a name that spelled a different kind of trouble. Chloe Evans. Lily answered, her voice hollow. Chloe? Well, well, well. Chloe's voice was a sip of iced green tea, sweet on the surface, acidic underneath. The I don't need a man empire has officially fallen. Live on air. That was spectacular, Lils. Truly award-winning. Lily sank onto her stool, pressing her palms against her closed eyelids. It's not funny. My entire brand is happy single life. What do I do? What can you do? Chloe's laughter tinkled, devoid of real warmth. You either go home and admit you lied to your sweet, sausage-making mother, becoming the town's permanent spinster joke, or she let the word hang, ripe with dramatic potential. Or what? Or you make Mark real. For what? 2 weeks? Another light laugh. It's the 21st century, babe. You can rent anything, even a believable, presentable boyfriend for a small-town Christmas. There's literally an app for that. A notification chimed on Lily's screen. Chloe had sent a link. Rent a date. Your +1 on demand. The icon was a cartoonish heart wearing a tiny tuxedo. It felt grotesque. You're insane. I can't hire a boyfriend. Can't you? Chloe countered, her tone shifting to faux concern. Think of your dad, Lily. John's getting older. All he talks about with my mom is how he wishes you'd find someone to look after you. Pathetic, but sweet. Imagine the light in his eyes if you brought home a successful, handsome Mark. You'd be giving him a Christmas gift. The manipulation was blatant, but it tapped into a deep, guilty well. Before Lily could form a rebuttal, her phone beeped with another call. Dad. Her stomach clenched. I have to go. It's my dad. Perfect timing, Chloe purred. Think about it. The app is idiot-proof. Swipe right on your fake future. Or enjoy those pity sausages alone. Chloe disconnected. Lily took a shuddering breath and answered her father's call. Hi, Dad. Lily. Her father's voice was a low, steady rumble, like distant thunder over the Ohio fields. There was no mention of Mark, no questioning about the live stream disaster, just the familiar, solid quiet. Just calling about your flight. Delta 2228 gets in at 3:17 p.m. on the 23rd, right? Yes, that's right. Good. A pause, filled with the soft crackle of a fireplace, or maybe just the static of the line. Do you need me to pick you up from the airport? She could picture him in his worn armchair by the wood stove. The dog at his feet, his brow furrowed with concentration as he navigated the airport's pickup lanes. The image was so deeply home it ached. It's okay, Dad. I can just get an Uber. It's going to be real cold in Ohio this year, he said, his voice softening with a quiet, persistent hope. Winds biting. Wouldn't want you waiting outside. It wasn't about the cold. It was about him being there, the first to welcome her back, the first to see her, the first to see if she was really okay. That unspoken expectation, the hope that she would arrive happy, fulfilled, not alone, wrapped around her heart and squeezed. Her carefully constructed walls of independence crumbled under the weight of his simple, loving offer. The silence stretched. She couldn't tell him the truth. She couldn't dim that quiet light in his voice. "Actually, Dad," she heard herself say, the words tasting like fate and poor decisions, "that would be great. Thanks. And Mark might be coming with me. I'll know for sure soon." Another pause, longer this time. She could almost hear him processing, the cautious hope blooming. "That so?" he finally said, his tone carefully neutral, but a warmth had seeped in. "Well, we'll be glad to have him. Drive will be warmer with 3. I'll be there." When they hung up, Lily sat in the sudden, echoing silence of her apartment. The ghost of her live stream confidence was gone. In its place was a cold, hard reality. She looked at her phone screen, still open to the Rent a Date app icon. Her thumb hovered over it. The lie was no longer a distant fiction. It was a 2-week performance with a leading role she needed to cast. With a tremor of something between despair and resolve, she tapped the icon. The lie, now a multi-million-dollar operation, was officially greenlit. He looked less like a financial analyst and more like a lumberjack who'd gotten lost on his way to chop down a tree. Lily clutched her latte in the dim corner of the Brooklyn coffee shop, her gaze fixed on the man weaving through the mismatched tables toward her. Jake, from the Rent-A-Date app, was a solid 6'2" of worn flannel and faded denim. His shirt, a checked pattern of deep green and gray, was soft with age at the elbows and cuffs. His jeans were clean but pale from countless washes, and his heavy work boots, though scuffed, were devoid of the fresh mud one might expect from his listed profession of seasonal farm work and freelance financial consulting. A ridiculous combination. But when he reached her table, and those blue eyes, a startling, clear cerulean, like the sky over Lake Erie on a frozen morning, met hers, her internal checklist stuttered. They were not the eyes of a confused farmhand. They were sharp, assessing, and held a stillness that seemed to absorb the chaotic hum of the cafe around them. "Lily?" His voice was a low baritone, warmer than she anticipated, with a faint, smoothing gravel to it. "That's me. Jake, I presume." She didn't offer her hand. This was a business transaction, not a date. He gave a single, slow nod and slid into the chair opposite her. His movements were economical, controlled. He ordered a black coffee from the passing waitress with a quiet "please" that felt genuine, not performative. He didn't fidget, he just was. It was unnerving. "So," Lily began, her tone crisp, sliding her tablet across the table. "Your profile says you do financial consulting. Freelance. Can you elaborate?" He took a slow sip of his coffee, his gaze never leaving hers. "I analyze market trends for small to mid-scale agricultural operations, help with budgeting, investment in equipment, risk management through futures." The words were textbook, but his delivery was devoid of a salesman's polish. It sounded like he was stating the weather. "Give me an example," Lily challenged, leaning forward. "Right now, the soy market," I told. One dark blonde brow arched slightly. "Soybean futures are currently elevated due to prolonged dry weather in Brazil and increased Chinese demand. However, the recent USDA report showed higher than expected stockpiles in the U.S. There's volatility. A producer back home, in a place like Ohio, might want to consider hedging about 50% of their expected crop now if they're risk-averse, but hold the rest if they can stomach the potential dip for a possible late-season rally." Lily blinked. That wasn't a canned answer. That was specific, nuanced, and mentioned Ohio. A coincidence? Corn, she fired next. Corn's a different beast, more tied to ethanol mandates and livestock feed. Price is being pressured by a forecasted bumper harvest in the Midwest. The real pressure point for family farms isn't always the commodity price itself, he continued, his voice dropping into a more thoughtful rhythm. It's the input costs. Fertilizer, fuel. The squeeze comes from both sides. I grew up around it. I understand the pressure. There it was again. That connection to a world she'd left behind. He spoke about it with an intimacy that no amount of research could easily fabricate. Her suspicion warred with a desperate hope. He was convincing. Too convincing? Her phone vibrated with a video call request from Chloe. Perfect timing. "Excuse me," Lily said, a brittle smile on her face. "My friend wants a preview," she answered, angling the screen to capture Jake. Chloe's perfectly contoured face appeared, her eyes widening then crinkling with immediate, derisive delight. "Oh, Lily," she drawled, her voice tinny through the speaker. "He's rustic. You're bringing this backwoods Bob the Builder to Ohio? People will laugh you out of the town square. Becky Carter will have a field day." A hot flush of shame crept up Lily's neck. Chloe was voicing her deepest fear. Before she could retort, Jake leaned slightly into the frame. His expression remained placid, but his blue eyes seemed to sharpen, pinning Chloe through the digital lens. "Appearances are often just the wrapping, Chloe," he said, his tone even but carrying an unexpected weight. "Real value is in the substance. Something tells me you're familiar with that concept." The silence on the line was absolute. Chloe's smirk vanished, replaced by a flash of irritation before her screen went black. She'd hung up. Lily stared at her phone, then at Jake, who had calmly returned to his coffee as if he'd just commented on the brew. Who was this guy? Shaken, but cornered by her own deadline, Lily pulled up the digital contract on her tablet. The terms, 2 weeks. All expenses paid, plus the agreed fee. You are Mark Lawson, a financial analyst from New York. You are successful, kind, and you think my mother's cooking is the best you've ever had. Understood? Jake scanned the document, his large, calloused fingers swiping smoothly across the screen. He paused at a clause, then pointed to it. "This one. Could we add something? Party B agrees to perform the role to the best of his ability." He took the stylus she offered. His handwriting was bold and clear. He added, "In return, Party A agrees to provide an authentic family environment. All personal information outside the scope of the role may remain confidential." Lily read it twice. It was odd, almost protective. Of her? Or of him? Why that? "A performance is only as good as the stage and the other actors," he said simply. "If I'm going to be Mark, I need to understand the world he's walking into. The real one. Not just the script." It was reasonable, eerily so. With a sense of stepping off a cliff, Lily signed her name. A moment later, he added his signature. Jacob Thorne. "Jacob?" she asked. "Jake's fine," he said, standing up. He dwarfed the small table. Up close, the flannel smelled faintly of cedar and cold air, not cheap cologne. He was leaving. In 2 days, she would meet him at the airport and they would fly into the heart of her deception together. Panic, sharp and sudden, clawed at her throat. "Jake, wait." He turned, those impossibly blue eyes patient. "This This has to work. You have to be believable. For the first time, his mouth quirked in something that wasn't quite a smile, but a softening at the corners. It transformed his face, making him look younger, kinder. "Don't worry, Lily," he said, his voice a low rumble that somehow soothed her fraying nerves. "I won't let you down." He took a step, then paused, looking back at her with an expression she couldn't decipher, a mix of empathy and something far more knowing. "And, for what it's worth," he added, his gaze holding hers just a moment too long, "I can tell you're not a very good liar." Then he was gone, melting into the Brooklyn crowd, leaving Lily frozen in her seat, the warm cafe suddenly feeling cold. Her phone buzzed with a notification from the app. Contract confirmed. Have a wonderful time with Mark. How did he know? The question echoed in the space he'd left behind, more unsettling than any of Chloe's barbs. How did he know she was lying when all she'd done so far was try to sell him the truth? He was, by far, the most overprepared, struggling actor Lily had ever met. The plane's engines thrummed a steady bass note as they climbed out of New York. Lily, coiled tight with anxiety in the window seat, nearly jumped when Jake reached into the worn leather satchel at his feet. He didn't pull out a dog-eared script or a bag of chips. He produced a sleek iPad. "Homework," he said, his voice a low murmur meant only for her. He unlocked it and handed it over. On the screen was a meticulously organized file titled Mark Lawson, Background and Integration. Lily scrolled, her eyes widening. It wasn't just bullet points, it was a full dossier. Mark's alma mater, his favorite baseball team, his preferred coffee order, and even his distaste for modern art, which aligned perfectly with her father's views. More chillingly, there was a section called Our Story. It contained sweet, plausible anecdotes. How they'd met at a farmer's market in Brooklyn, their first date at a quiet Italian place, the time he'd helped her redesign a client's logo by suggesting a more earthy color palette. "This is incredibly detailed," Lily managed, her throat dry. "The devil's in the details," Jake replied, looking out at the clouds. He then reached back into his satchel and pulled out two small, neatly wrapped packages. The paper was simple craft, tied with twine. "For your parents, small gestures." He placed them on her tray table. One was a flat, rectangular box. The other, softer and square. With his permission, she carefully peeled back a corner of the paper on the flat one. Nestled inside was a Swiss Army knife, but not the red plastic kind from a gas station. This had polished rosewood scales, and the steel gleamed with a quality that spoke of precision engineering. The other package revealed a cashmere scarf in a soft heather gray, so fine it felt like holding a cloud. "Jake, these are too much. And how did you know? The knife for my dad, the scarf for my mom. You mentioned your dad was a practical man who valued good tools. Your mom always gets a chill, you said, when she waits for you on the porch." He recited her own casual remarks from their coffee meeting verbatim. "They're not flashy. They're thoughtful. That's what Mark would do, isn't it? A struggling seasonal worker who bought hand-finished Swiss knives and Scottish cashmere." The dissonance was a scream in the quiet cabin. Lily stared at the gifts, then at his profile. He was already looking out the window again, his expression unreadable. The flannel shirt was the same, but the man inside it was a Russian nesting doll of contradictions. Eventually, the drone of the engines and her own exhaustion won. She dozed fitfully, waking to find Jake asleep beside her. His head was tilted back, the sharp lines of his face relaxed. The iPad was on his lap, but slid partly onto the empty middle seat was the book he'd been reading. Its title made her breath catch: Sustainable Agricultural Economics and Land Valuation. It was a dense, academic tome, at least 800 pages thick. Heart thudding, she glanced at him. His breathing was deep and even. Slowly, she leaned over and gently slid the book free. It fell open to a chapter on water rights and long-term soil equity. The margins were not empty. Neat, precise handwriting filled them. Notes, equations, questions, but not in English. She recognized some of the words. Bodenqualität, Wassernutzungsrecht, German, and not beginner's phrases. The script was elegant, practiced, the handwriting of someone highly educated. A cold trickle of suspicion ran down her spine. She carefully replaced the book. When Jake stirred an hour later, rubbing a hand over his stubbled jaw, she seized the moment. "You're very well read for someone who travels a lot," she said, trying for casual. He looked at her, those blue eyes clearing of sleep instantly, becoming guarded. "It's a field of interest. Where did you study? Your understanding of the markets, it's very advanced." "I didn't. Not formally." His voice was flat, a door closing. "You learn more in the fields and at kitchen tables than in any lecture hall." She pushed, a nervous energy driving her. "What about your family? Are they in agriculture?" The change in him was instantaneous and profound. It was as if a steel shutter slammed down behind his eyes. His face, usually so composed, went blank in a way that was more frightening than any scowl. He looked past her, out at the endless gray sky, and for a moment he seemed utterly alone in the crowded plain. "They're gone," he said finally. The words scraped raw. "A long time ago, a fire." The pain in his voice was so stark, so unfeigned that Lily's own breath hitched. It wasn't part of a script. It was a scar laid bare. Any suspicion curdled into a sharp, shameful guilt. "Jake, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to—" "It's fine," he cut her off, his tone shifting back to neutral, but the echo of the hurt remained. He picked up his book, a clear dismissal. The plane began its descent into the small regional airport. As the familiar patchwork of snowy fields and bare trees rose to meet them, Lily's anxiety returned in a nauseating wave. The performance was about to begin. They collected their bags in silence. Jake shouldered his old leather satchel and her larger suitcase without being asked, his movements steady. He had changed into a cleaner, but equally worn flannel shirt. He looked every bit the decent, humble man her parents might hope for. And then the automatic doors slid open, and the Ohio winter slapped them in the face, crisp and smelling of pine and distant wood smoke. There they were. Her mother, Mary, bundled in a puffy coat, was jumping on her toes and waving both arms as if guiding in a 747. Her father, John, stood a pace behind her, solid and still as an oak trunk in his old barn jacket, his hands shoved in his pockets. Lily forced a wobbly smile and waved back. Her eyes flew to her father's face. He wasn't looking at her. His gaze was locked on Jake with an intensity that made her stomach drop. It wasn't a welcoming look. It was a piercing, deep scrutiny. His brow was furrowed, not in anger, but in a profound and troubled confusion. It was the look of a man trying to match a face to a memory he couldn't quite place. Jake's hand found hers. His grip was firm, warm, and startlingly reassuring. He leaned in, his breath a warm cloud near her ear, his voice so low only she could hear it over the wind. "Showtime," he murmured. Then, after a heartbeat, he added words that were not in any contract, words that felt like both a promise and a plea. "And Lily, trust me." He gave her hand a slight, steadying squeeze and stepped forward, pulling her gently into the blinding light of her deception, directly into the path of her father's disquieting, recognizing stare. The battle, it seemed, had begun before the first word was even spoken. He fixed the tractor in 37 minutes. The ancient John Deere, a hulking beast of green and rust, had been coughing smoke and refusing to move from its spot beside the barn when they pulled up the gravel drive. Lily's father, John, let out a long, weary sigh that condensed in the cold air. "Hydraulic line again, or maybe the clutch. I'll call Mike in the morning. He'll charge me an arm and a leg." Lily braced for an awkward silence, for Mark to nod politely and follow her inside. Instead, Jake set down his bag. "Mind if I take a look, sir?" John eyed him, that same troubled scrutiny from the airport still present, but he gave a curt nod. Jake shrugged off his flannel coat, hanging it on a fence post. Beneath it, a simple gray t-shirt stretched across broad shoulders. He rolled up his sleeves, revealing forearms corded with muscle and a smattering of faint old scars. He didn't hesitate. He just walked up to the tractor, opened the side panel, and leaned in. Lily watched, mesmerized and horrified, as her rented boyfriend disappeared halfway into the machine's greasy innards. Her mother, Mary, clucked her tongue. "Oh, he'll get all dirty. His nice clothes." But John had gone still, his arms crossed over his chest, his eyes tracking Jake's every move. There was no fumbling. Jake's hands, large and capable, moved with a sure, economical precision. He asked for a wrench, and John handed him the correct size without a word. He requested a rag, and Lily scrambled to find one. After a period of focused silence broken only by the clink of metal and Jake's occasional murmured observations to himself, he slid out. A smudge of black grease streaked his cheekbone. "It's the clutch assembly." A pin sheared off. "I can jury-rig a fix to get you through the week, if you've got a spare bolt about this size." He held up his grease-blackened fingers, indicating a measurement. John stared at him for a long beat, then turned and strode to his workshop without a word. He returned with a bolt. Jake took it, gave a satisfied nod, and ducked back in. 7 minutes later, he emerged, wiped his hands on the rag, and nodded to John. "Try her now, Beau." John, his expression unreadable, climbed into the cab. He turned the key. The engine roared to life, a healthy, full-throated sound. He engaged the gear. The tractor lurched forward smoothly. He drove it in a small circle, parked it, and cut the engine. The silence that followed was profound. John hopped down and walked straight up to Jake. He didn't offer a handshake. He placed a heavy, calloused hand on Jake's shoulder, the gesture startling in its familiarity. "Good work, son," he said, his voice gruff. "Where'd a financial fella learn to do that?" Jake accepted the praise with a slight dip of his head. A small, genuine smile touched his lips, softening the stark lines of his face. I work in finance, sir, but I like to understand how things work, from the ground up. The ease between them, forged in grease and grit, was both a relief and a new source of anxiety for Lily. Her father, a man who trusted steel and soil over words, had been won over in half an hour. It was too fast. The unease crystallized that afternoon with the arrival of the Carters from the neighboring farm. Becky Carter, swaddled in a designer puffer jacket that screamed city visit, swept in with her parents. Her eyes, the same calculating hazel Lily remembered from high school, immediately latched onto Jake, who was quietly helping Mary set the table. "So you're the famous Mark," Becky said, her smile slick as oil. "Lily's been so secretive. Which firm in the city are you with? I know a few people. Maybe we have mutual connections." Jake didn't miss a beat, setting a plate down with care. "Bryant and Strauss, mid-market. Probably too small to be on your radar, Becky." The name was from his dossier, bland and safe. Becky's smile widened, showing perfectly whitened teeth. "Oh, I thought perhaps somewhere more impactful, like Thorne Capital or Heartland Growth Partners." She delivered the names like little darts, watching his face closely. At Heartland Growth, Lily saw it. A tiny, almost imperceptible flicker in Jake's blue eyes. A momentary freeze in the act of reaching for another plate. But it was gone in a nanosecond, smoothed over by a polite, dismissive shrug. "Heard of them, different league. I prefer a place where I can see the direct impact of my work." The dinner table became a battleground. Becky, sipping wine, turned her fire on Lily. "Freelance design must be so unpredictable, Lily. Feast or famine, I hear. Must be a relief to have someone stable." She gestured vaguely at Jake. Is Mark having to be the provider yet? Lily felt a hot wave of humiliation climb her neck. Before she could form a retort, a warm, firm pressure covered her hand where it rested on the table. Jake's hand. He gave hers a brief, reassuring squeeze before turning to Becky. His expression was calm, but his eyes had turned the color of a winter lake, clear and icy. "Becky, that's an interesting assumption," he said, his voice a model of polite conversation. "Lily's gross income last year surpassed the average for a mid-tier law firm partner in Cleveland. My role isn't to provide for her. It's to be fortunate enough to partner with her and support her vision in my own way." He delivered the facts like a gentle, precise scalpel, simultaneously defending Lily and exposing Becky's petty provocation for what it was. Becky's cheeks blotched an ugly red. The table fell silent. Later that night, the farmhouse settled into a deep quiet. Lily was heading to the kitchen for water when her father's voice, low and gravelly, stopped her from the back porch. "Lily, come here a minute." She found him on the porch swing, a curl of smoke from his rare cigarette rising into the frozen air. He didn't look at her for a long time, just stared out at the dark fields silvered by moonlight. "Oh," finally, he spoke. "That boy, Mark, of yours." He took a drag, the ember glowing. "He's not simple." Lily's heart thudded against her ribs. "What do you mean?" "I mean his hands know work, real work. But his eyes, they're not a mechanic's eyes, or just an analyst's eyes." John turned his head, and in the dim light, his face was etched with a deep, knowing concern. "They see further. They calculate more than numbers. I've met men like that before. Men who sit in quiet rooms and decide the fate of whole parcels of land, whole communities, with a signature. He stubbed out the cigarette, his gaze piercing her in the darkness. Are you sure? Really sure you know who he is? She looked like a cardinal in the snow, a vibrant shock of crimson against the muted greens and twinkling whites of the town hall. Lily's dress was a simple slip of red silk that caught the light with every movement, a far cry from her usual Brooklyn blacks and neutrals. She felt a bond, visible in a way that had nothing to do with the cut of the dress and everything to do with the man standing beside her in his one surprisingly well-tailored navy suit. He'd produced it from his seemingly bottomless satchel that morning. When she'd descended the farmhouse stairs, Jake had been talking to her father by the fire. He'd turned, and the words died on his lips. His gaze traveled from the loose waves of her hair down to the hem of her dress, a slow, deliberate sweep that felt like a physical touch. The usual analytical sharpness in his blue eyes was gone, replaced by something warmer, deeper, and utterly focused. For a long, breathless moment, he just looked. "You look," he began, his voice unusually rough. He cleared his throat. "You look beautiful, Lily." It wasn't the smooth line of Mark, it was stripped bare. A simple, devastating truth. Her heart gave a foolish, traitorous lurch. It's part of the act, she told herself, even as her cheeks warmed. The town hall was a festive chaos of tinsel, a slightly out-of-tune local band, and the scent of pine and spiced cider. Jake's hand found the small of her back as they entered, a proprietary gesture that felt less like acting and more like instinct. He guided her through the crowd with an easy confidence, greeting her parents' friends with a firm handshake and a genuine smile that never quite reached his watchful eyes. When a slow song began, a wistful, familiar Christmas ballad, he didn't ask. He simply turned to her, his hand extended, an unspoken question in his gaze. Placing her hand in his felt inevitable. He drew her into his arms, and the world narrowed to the space between them. His suit jacket was soft under her fingers, but the body beneath was solid, unyielding. He held her closer than the dance required, his palm a firm, warm pressure against her back. Her cheek was near the hollow of his throat, and she could feel the steady, strong beat of his pulse. His breath stirred her hair as he leaned in, his voice a low rumble meant only for her. "You're stunning, Lily Anderson." The sound of her full name on his lips, whispered in the half-darkness of the dance floor, shattered another piece of the Mark facade. This wasn't a line for the character. It felt like a secret passed from Jacob to Lily. Her own pulse hammered in response, a wild, confused rhythm against the slow music. Performance or peril? The peril arrived, predictably, wearing too much perfume and a spiteful smile. Becky Carter, cheeks flushed from wine, detached herself from a cluster of local business owners, the town's self-appointed elite. Her voice cut through the melody, sharp and deliberately loud. "You know, everyone, I just can't place it," Becky declared, pointing a manicured finger directly at Jake. "But I swear on my bar certificate, I've seen that face before. Last year's Forbes, 30 under 30 list. The social impact and agriculture category. I'm positive." A wave of silence rippled out from their little group. Eyes swiveled. The music seemed to fade. Lily felt a cold sweat break out between her shoulder blades. Her fingers tightened on Jake's shoulder. This was it. The lie, so carefully constructed, was about to be unraveled by a drunk, jealous woman with a good memory. Jake didn't flinch. He didn't tense. Instead, he let out a soft, self-deprecating chuckle that sounded utterly relaxed. He pulled Lily just a fraction closer, his arm snug around her waist. "Becky, you're going to give me a complex," he said, his voice carrying just enough amusement. "I wish. I'm just a grunt at Heartland Growth. You're probably thinking of the founder, Jacob Thorne. Trust me," he added with a wry grin directed at the amused onlookers. "He's a lot better looking in his Forbes photo, and definitely drives a fancier truck." The tension shattered into laughter. The moment was deflected, turned into a joke at Becky's expense. The businessmen chuckled, one clapping Jake on the back. "Don't I know it? Thorne's a ghost. Never shows his face around here, just sends his suits." Becky, her accusation turned to foolishness, flushed a deeper, mortified red and stumbled back toward the punch bowl. But the spotlight of suspicion had been too bright. Jake's grip on Lily tightened almost imperceptibly. His eyes scanned the room, and she saw a decision solidify in their blue depths. He guided her smoothly, deliberately, away from the dance floor and toward a quieter corner near the enormous, glittering Christmas tree. A sprig of mistletoe dangled innocently from a beam above. "We need to sell this," he murmured, his voice low and urgent. "Now." Before she could process his words, his hands came up to cradle her face. His thumbs brushed her cheekbones, a gesture so tender it stole the breath from her lungs. Then he bent his head. The kiss was not a peck. It was not for show. It was a deep, claiming pressure that wiped every thought of Becky, Forbes, and fake boyfriends from her mind. His lips were warm and sure, moving against hers with a hunger that felt startlingly real. One hand slid into her hair, tilting her head to better fit his mouth to hers. A shockwave of pure, undiluted sensation rocketed through her, a dizzying blend of warmth, cedar, and something uniquely Jake. Her rational mind screamed, but her body betrayed her, softening, leaning into him, her hands fisting in the front of his suit jacket to keep from falling. She kissed him back. Time stretched and snapped. When he finally pulled away, it was only a breath's distance. His eyes were dark, the pupils wide, swallowing the blue. His breathing was uneven, matching the frantic rhythm of her own. He still held her face, his gaze searching hers with a raw intensity that was terrifying. "That," he said, his voice a gravelly whisper that vibrated through her, "wasn't in the contract." He paused, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. A muscle ticked in his own. "And I'm not sorry." Sleep was impossible. The ghost of his kiss burned on her lips, a phantom brand that set her whole body humming with a chaotic, terrifying energy. Lily lay stiffly in her childhood bed, staring at the glow in the dark stars she'd stuck to the ceiling 2 decades ago. They were faint now, just like her understanding of the man sleeping on the pull-out couch downstairs. The raw intensity in Jake's eyes after the kiss, the wary recognition in her father's gaze, the way Jake spoke about soil and markets like they were his native tongue. It all swirled into a sickening vortex of doubt. He was too much, too knowing, too real. Heartland Growth. Becky's poisoned dart had found its mark. Lily sat up, the old springs creaking. The blue light of her phone cut through the darkness. She typed the name into the search bar. The company website was a study in sleek, understated power. A minimalist logo against a backdrop of a Chicago skyscraper and rolling farmland. Bridging Innovation and Legacy, the tagline read. She clicked on Leadership. A paragraph described the CEO, Jacob Thorne, as a visionary redefining sustainable agribusiness and a notoriously private individual. There were no clear headshots, just a few distant, blurry photographs from charity galas and groundbreakings, always with his face partially turned or in shadow. A ghost, just as the businessman at the dance had said, her thumb gold, fueled by a desperate, prickling anxiety. She found a link to a local Ohio agricultural blog, a year-old article about a community grain silo renovation. The photo was grainy, taken on a sunny day. A man in an impeccably cut charcoal suit was cutting a ribbon. He was angled away from the camera, but the line of his jaw was clean and sharp, his dark blonde hair neatly trimmed. Something clenched in Lily's chest. She zoomed in. The world tilted. It was the profile. The high bridge of the nose, the strong, decisive line of the jaw, the way he held his shoulders, even in a suit worth more than her car, it was unmistakable. But it was the eyes, even in the low-resolution image, that stole the air from her lungs. They were fixed on the ribbon, a clear, focused, and piercing blue. The caption below was a sledgehammer. Jacob Thorne, CEO of Heartland Growth, celebrates the completion of the community-funded silo project in Cedar County. A cold sweat, sharper than any she'd felt at the dance, drenched her. The pieces didn't just fit, they locked together with a deafening click. The worn flannel was a costume. The leather satchel wasn't a thrift store, it was weathered luxury. The cashmere scarf, the Swiss knife, the encyclopedic knowledge, it wasn't preparation. It was his reality. She wasn't the employer. She was the mark. The why was a black hole of terrifying possibilities. Her parents' land? The farm had been in the Anderson family for generations, but it wasn't huge. Was it about some mineral right, a development plan, or was it something crueler, simpler, a bored billionaire's twisted holiday game? She needed irrefutable proof, something she could hold in her hand. The farmhouse was tomb-silent as she crept down the stairs, each creak of the wood like a gunshot. The living room was dark, lit only by the dying embers in the fireplace. Jacob, was a still, broad shape under a quilt on the sofa bed, his breathing deep and even. His worn leather jacket was draped over a chair. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she reached for it, her fingers clumsy. The inside pocket yielded nothing. She found the wallet in the main pocket. It was simple, burnished leather, but the weight of it was all wrong. She opened it. There were no frayed receipts, no debit cards from local banks. On one side, nestled in a slot, was a single card. It was black, not matte, but a deep obsidian gloss. In the center, stamped in discreet silver, were the words American Express Centurion. Her blood ran icy. She'd only ever seen those in movies. Behind it was a plain, thick white business card. No fancy embossing, just elegant, sharp type. Jacob Thorne, Chief Executive Officer, Heartland Growth Holdings. And below, a phone number. A number she knew, the one she had saved in her phone as Jake, rent a date. The confirmation was a physical blow. She swayed on her feet, the cold leather of the wallet biting into her palm. Rage, hot and purifying, surged up to incinerate the last of her confusion and hurt. He had played her. He had made her feel things, real things, all while lying about his very existence. She didn't think. She turned on her heel, the business card clutched like a knife in her fist, and marched to the sofa bed. She didn't see the man who'd fixed the tractor or kissed her under the mistletoe. She saw the enemy. Get up. The shape stirred. As her eyes adjusted, she saw he wasn't sleeping. He was sitting in the armchair by the window, a silhouette against the moonlit snow outside, watching her. Slowly, he turned his head. The soft, late-night shadows fell away from his face, revealing not Jake's quiet warmth, but an expression of composed, weary authority. The farm boy was gone. In his place was the man from the website, the man who commanded skyscrapers and futures markets. His eyes were the same blue, but now they were the color of a glacier, remote and impenetrable. Lily didn't give him a chance to speak. She strode forward and flung the business card. It fluttered through the air and landed on his chest before falling into his lap. "The game ends here, Mr. Thorne," she spat, her voice trembling with fury. "Who are you, and what the hell do you want from my family?" Jacob Thorne looked down at the card in his lap, then back up at her. He didn't look surprised. He looked resigned and profoundly tired. He let out a long, slow breath. The sigh of a man setting down a heavy burden. "You finally know," he said, his voice the same low baritone, but stripped of all rural softness. It was cool, clear, and carried the weight of command. He leaned forward, the moonlight catching the sharp planes of his face. "But you're only half right, Lily. I don't want to take anything from your family." He paused, his gaze holding hers with a startling, grave intensity. "I came to give something back." "Give something back?" Lily's voice was a brittle shard in the quiet room. The fury was still there, a protective shell over a deep, spreading hurt. What could you possibly have to give? A check? An apology? After lying to us? After making me— She couldn't finish the sentence. After making me feel things for a ghost. Jacob, no longer Jake, stood up from the chair. He didn't approach her. He simply stood there, a tall, somber figure framed by the swirling snow beginning to fall outside the window. "It started 15 years ago," he began, his voice low and steady, stripped of all pretense. "My father's company, Thorne Agricultural Holdings, was expanding aggressively. There was a parcel of land adjacent to this farm, the most fertile 100 acres in the county. It belonged to your grandfather, Arthur Anderson." Lily felt a chill that had nothing to do with the draft. She knew the story. The lost South Field, her grandfather's heartbreak. "My father's lawyers used predatory tactics," Jacob continued, his gaze fixed on some painful point in the past. "They exploited a clause in a loan, spread rumors about water rights devaluation, lowballed him until he had no choice. They bought it for a fraction of its worth. The profit from that land funded our company's next big leap. Your grandfather died less than a year later. My father called it good business. I eventually called it theft, called." He finally looked at her, his blue eyes holding a raw honesty that was more disarming than any lie. When I took over, one of the first things I did was track down that transaction. And the family it hurt. Why, the charade then? Lily shot back, wrapping her arms around herself. Why not just write a check and send a fancy lawyer? Get your guilt off your conscience and be done with it. Because I'd been watching you for a while, Lily. The admission was quiet, startling in its directness. Your design portfolio, the way you built your business from nothing, your resilience. I didn't just want to return land, I wanted to understand the people I'd wronged, and I wanted to meet you, to know you. A horrible, dizzying realization dawned on her. The rent-a-date profile. I created it, he confirmed without flinching. The anonymous account. I set the parameters. When your live stream blew up and you were desperate, I made sure my profile was the first one you'd see, the only one that fit your impossible criteria. I didn't just take the job, Lily. I orchestrated it. The betrayal deepened, curdling into something humiliating. He hadn't just lied about his identity. He'd manipulated her very desperation. So, this was all an experiment? Her voice trembled. We were your lab rats. A case study in billionaire guilt and small-town redemption. Did you take notes on how quaint we were? On how pathetically grateful we'd be for your grand gesture? No. The word was sharp, final. He took a step forward, and the glacial CEO facade cracked, revealing the same intense, passionate man who had kissed her. Nothing about my feelings for your parents is an act. The respect I have for your father, the affection for your mother's kindness, that's real. My admiration for your talent, your strength, that's been real since long before I stepped on that plane. Stop it, she whispered, hot tears blurring her vision. She angrily swiped them away. You don't get to say that. Not after all the lies. I don't need your pity, Jacob. My family doesn't need your charity. It's not pity. The force in his voice made her jump. He closed the distance between them but didn't touch her. His eyes blazed with a sincerity that was terrifying in its magnitude. Lily, yes, it started as a plan. A convoluted, arrogant, stupid plan to right a wrong and satisfy my own curiosity. But nothing in my heart since I met you has been part of any script. He took a ragged breath, his gaze searching hers, pleading for understanding. The way I feel about you is the most real thing I've had in my life since the night I read your anonymous confession online. The world stopped. The snow outside seemed to hang in the air. What? 6 months ago, he said, his voice dropping to a husky whisper, on a forum for freelance creatives. A post by an anonymous user, Valley Designer. She wrote about the pressure, the loneliness of building a facade of success while fielding calls from home about when she'd finally find someone. She wrote about loving her family so much it hurt, and lying to them because the truth felt like failure. Lily's hands flew to her mouth. She remembered that night. A moment of weakness, wine-fueled, pouring her heart out into the void of the internet, certain of her anonymity. It was you, Jacob said, his eyes soft with a painful tenderness. I knew it was you. I'd followed your work for years. The voice, the details, it was you. And I couldn't get it out of my head. Here was this incredibly talented, fierce woman, carrying this weight alone. A weight my family helped create. That was the final push. I couldn't just send a check. I had to come. I had to know you. The confession undid her. The anger was still there, a tangled knot with the hurt and the shocking, undeniable truth shining in his eyes. She was crying in earnest now, silent tears tracking through the tumult of her emotions. Before she could form a coherent thought, the door to the living room swung open. Light from the hallway spilled in, illuminating John Anderson's formidable silhouette. He was fully dressed, his face a mask of grim resolve. In his hand was not a weapon, but a single printed sheet of paper. His eyes, heavy with a father's worry and a man's hard-won wisdom, moved from Lily's tear-streaked face to Jacob's tense stance. "All right, you two," he said, his voice a deep, quiet rumble that carried the full weight of his authority. "I think it's past time we all had a real conversation." He held up the paper slightly. As a family. The truth, it seemed, was no longer a secret between two conspirators. It was a storm about to break over the entire house. The farmhouse kitchen, usually a sanctuary of cinnamon and percolating coffee, felt like a courtroom. The winter sun strained through the frost-etched windows, casting sharp lines of light across the worn wooden table. Mary stood at the stove, frozen mid-pour, a pitcher of orange juice in her hand. Her eyes darted between her husband's granite expression, her daughter's pale, puffy face, and the tall, silent man who was no longer Jake. The air was thick with the scent of bacon and unspoken catastrophe. John Anderson didn't sit. He placed a single sheet of crisp, legal-sized paper on the table with a decisive tap. It landed between the butter dish and the jar of homemade strawberry jam. Lily stared at it. The letterhead was from a prestigious Chicago law firm she recognized from headlines. The dense text was a blur, but one line stood out in stark clarity. Deed of transfer. Grantee. Lillian Lily Anderson. Property, parcel 7A, Cedar County, approx. 50 acres. Her breath hitched. The South Field. The land her grandfather lost. John's gaze, heavy and unyielding, settled on Jacob. "Found this in the living room last night," he said, his voice a low, steady rumble. "After I heard the shouting. Care to explain?" "Jacob Thorne?" Mary gasped softly, the pitcher clattering slightly as she set it down. "Thorne? Like the company that took Granddad's land?" Lily finished, her voice hollow. All eyes were on Jacob. He had stood when they entered the room, and he remained standing, a soldier at attention. He wore the same faded jeans from the first day, but the flannel shirt couldn't soften the stark lines of guilt and resolve on his face. The CEO and the farmhand were fused in this moment of reckoning. "Yes, sir," Jacob said, meeting John's gaze without flinching. "That's exactly who I am." He took a deep breath, his eyes sweeping to include Mary, whose hand had flown to her mouth, then finally to Lily, who stared back, a maelstrom of hurt and confusion in her own. "And I owe every one of you an apology, a profound, inadequate apology for the deception." He didn't sit. He spoke clearly, his hands clasped loosely in front of him, a posture of humility that seemed both alien and genuine on him. He recounted the story again. The predatory acquisition, his father's callousness, his own shame upon discovering it. He spoke of tracking the Andersons, of watching Lily's career from afar with growing admiration. And he laid bare the mechanics of the lie, the crafted rent-a-date profile, the deliberate entrapment of her desperation. "My initial goal was to return the land," he said, his voice gaining a raw edge as he looked at Lily. But not as a cold transaction. I wanted to understand the family my father broke. I wanted to meet you, to know the woman who built so much from nothing. He turned back to her parents. The respect I have for you, Mr. Anderson, for the life you've built and preserved, is real. The gratitude I feel for your kindness, Mrs. Anderson, is real. I came under false pretenses, but the feelings I developed in this house are the truest thing I have felt in years. He paused, his throat working. And my feelings for Lily, they were never part of any plan. They are separate from the guilt, separate from the restitution. I don't expect her to forgive me. I don't expect her to feel the same. I just needed you all to know that while the man was a lie, the heart behind him isn't. The silence that followed was broken by a soft, wet sniffle. Mary was crying, but not with the outrage Lily had expected. Her mother's eyes, wide and sorrowful, were fixed on Jacob with a startling depth of empathy. Your father, Mary began, her voice wavering. All those years ago, we always knew in our bones something wasn't right about that sale. The price, the pressure. It broke my father-in-law's spirit. She wiped her cheek with the corner of her apron. But you're trying to carry that weight. You're trying to make it right. Her gaze, now clear and direct, shifted to her daughter. And you, Lily, look at him. Really look. Do you love him, the real him? The question, so blunt and maternal, hung in the air like the final note of a song. All heads turned to Lily. She felt the weight of their stares. Her father's probing intensity, her mother's hopeful worry, and Jacob's. Jacob's was a silent plea, a raw vulnerability he made no attempt to hide. Her eyes traveled over him. She didn't see Jake, the charming, humble actor. She saw Jacob Thorne. The power in his broad shoulders that had fixed a tractor, the intelligence in his blue eyes that had dissected commodity markets, the sorrow in the set of his mouth that spoke of a lonely, guilt-ridden legacy. She saw the man who had defended her against Becky with razor-sharp wit, who had kissed her under the mistletoe as if he were drowning, and she was air, who had whispered her anonymous fears back to her in the dark. The anger was still there, a bruised and tender place. But beneath it, undeniable, was the memory of every moment of unexpected warmth, every flicker of real connection that had scared her precisely because it felt not acted. Her voice was a shaky whisper. She cleared her throat, fists clenched in her lap. I don't know. The admission was painful, honest. It's all so mixed up. The lies, they hurt. A lot. She saw him flinch, a barely there tightening around his eyes, but he didn't look away. She took a trembling breath, her gaze locking with his. But I know one thing. The words came out stronger, fueled by a sudden, clear certainty that rose from the chaos. I don't want you to leave, not yet. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't a declaration of love. It was a fragile, essential truth. The story, for her, wasn't over. The first hesitant admission that the man, for all his deceit, had carved a space for himself in her world that she wasn't ready to see empty. The tension from the morning's confrontation didn't fully dissolve, but it settled, like sediment in a stirred pond, leaving a clearer, if fragile, space. It was Christmas morning. The tree twinkled in the corner of the living room, but the usual boisterous joy was tempered with a new, profound gravity. Jacob, who had spent the night back on the pull-out couch by silent mutual agreement, looked like a man awaiting a verdict. He'd changed into a fresh, simple flannel shirt, but the billionaire was visible now in the straightness of his spine, the careful consideration in his eyes as he watched the family. After the presents from under the tree were exchanged, socks, a new gardening tool for John, a cozy sweater for Mary, a set of professional markers for Lily, Jacob cleared his throat. He reached into his leather satchel, not for the dramatic deed, but for two smaller, plain envelopes. He walked first to John, who was sitting in his armchair, his expression still a fortress of caution. "Sir?" Jacob said, holding out one envelope. "This is for you." John took it, his thick fingers careful. He pulled out a single sheet of paper. Lily, perched on the sofa arm, watched her father's face. She saw his eyes scan the text, his brow furrowing, then smoothing out in surprise. His calloused thumb rubbed slowly over the embossed letterhead. "It's a letter of intent," Jacob explained, his voice respectful but firm. "From Heartland Growth. We're launching a pilot project for a proprietary strain of high-yield organic corn. We're looking for a partner with proven land stewardship and generational knowledge to trial it. We provide the seed, the tech, the upfront capital. You provide the land and the expertise. Profits are split 50-50. He paused. "It's not a gift. It's a business proposal. I believe it could be a mutually beneficial partnership." Lily held her breath. This wasn't charity. It wasn't throwing money at a problem. It was an offer of respect. A recognition of his father's worth as a farmer, not a victim. John looked from the paper to Jacob, his gaze searching. The hard suspicion in his eyes softened a fraction, replaced by a dawning, cautious comprehension. He gave a slow, single nod. "I'll read it over," he said, his voice gruff. But the way he held the paper, not dismissively, but with consideration, spoke volumes. Jacob then turned to Mary, who was wringing her hands on the couch. He offered her the second envelope. "Mrs. Anderson." Mary opened it with gentle curiosity. Inside wasn't a document, but a small, polished wooden box. She lifted the lid. A soft gasp escaped her. Nestled on a bed of velvet were half a dozen old photographs, their edges slightly curled, their colors faded with time. "I hired a researcher," Jacob said quietly, his voice tinged with reverence, "to find pictures of the land from before. These were in an archive at the County Historical Society." Mary picked up the top photo with trembling fingers. It showed her father-in-law, Arthur, a much younger man, standing proudly in front of a thriving cornfield, his hat tipped back, a broad smile on his face. The South Field. Another showed a family picnic under the old oak that still stood on the property line. Tears welled in Mary's eyes and spilled over silently. She clutched the box to her chest, her shoulders shaking with quiet sobs. It wasn't land he was returning in that moment. It was a piece of stolen history, a fragment of lost happiness. No amount of money could buy that. Finally, Jacob turned to Lily. He didn't have an envelope. From his pocket, he produced a single first-class plane ticket. He held it out to her. "This," he said, his blue eyes fixed on hers with an intensity that made the room fade away, "is for you." Lily took it, her fingers brushing his. The ticket was New York to Chicago. Open return. "It's not a ring. It's not a contract," he continued, his voice low, meant only for her, though the whole room listened. It's an invitation. Heartland Growth is rebranding its community agriculture initiative. We need a designer with vision, someone who understands both the heartland and modern branding. I'm offering you the project, Lily, at your rate, your terms. A real job. He took a half step closer, his gaze unwavering. And, if you're willing, after a day of very real, very professional meetings, I would like to take you to dinner. Not as Mark and his client. Not as a billionaire and a project. As Jacob and Lily. No contract. No performance. Just us. The offer hung in the air, more terrifying and wonderful than any grand gesture. He wasn't buying her affection or assuaging his guilt with presents. He was offering her a choice, a professional opportunity that honored her skill, and a personal one that laid his heart bare without any guarantee. Lily looked down at the ticket, the bold print of the cities, then back up at him. She saw the hope warring with fear in his eyes, the vulnerability he made no attempt to hide. Her own heart thudded a frantic, joyous, terrified rhythm against her ribs. In that moment, she knew, through all the anger and the hurt, the undeniable truth had taken root. She loved him, the complicated, guilt-ridden, fiercely honest man he truly was. But she was Lily Anderson, independent, proud, and she'd be damned if she'd make it easy for him. A small, genuine smile, the first since the night of the dance, touched her lips. She held up the ticket, meeting his anxious gaze with a spark of her old, defiant self. I accept the project, she said, her voice clear. My day rate is steep, and I don't tolerate a micromanaging. A flicker of relief crossed his face. As for the dinner, she continued, letting the pause stretch, watching him hold his breath. I'll let you know after I've assessed your professionalism in the boardroom. The smile that broke across Jacob Thorne's face then was not the practiced charm of Jake or the cool control of the CEO. It was a real, breathtaking, hopeful smile that lit his whole face and crinkled the corners of those impossibly blue eyes. It was the smile of a man who'd been given not a guarantee, but a chance. Understood, he said, the word a soft, fervent promise. And for the first time since the lie began, Lily felt the ground beneath her feet was solid, not because of a fiction they upheld, but because of a fragile, precious truth they were just beginning to build. And that's how the Rooted in Trust campaign successfully bridged the digital consumer with the legacy farmer, increasing direct sales for the Anderson Thorne Heritage Grains line by 150% in its first quarter. Lily's voice was calm, confident, echoing slightly in her sunlit Brooklyn studio. On her large monitor, a half-dozen faces from the Heartland Growth Marketing team nodded, one executive giving a thumbs up. She wore a tailored emerald green blazer, her hair swept up in a sleek knot. The Lily of the Valley persona was gone, replaced by Lily Anderson, sought-after brand consultant. The client on the screen wasn't just any client. It was the company whose CEO had once pretended to be her penniless boyfriend. Outstanding work, as always, Lily, the head of marketing said. We'll review the next phase after the holidays. Enjoy Christmas with your family. Thank you. You as well. The call ended. Lily leaned back in her chair, a slow, satisfied smile spreading across her face. The project had been more than a job. It had been a redemption song in color and typeface. The Anderson-Thorne partnership wasn't just a line on a balance sheet. It was a thriving venture, its success a tangible symbol of healing. Later that week, the Ohio countryside flew by her window in a blur of white and muted winter browns. The farm, when she turned down the familiar graveled drive, looked different, brighter. A new, efficient-looking equipment shed stood where the old, leaning one had been. The fields, blanketed in snow, seemed to hold a promise under their quiet cover. As her rental car crunched to a halt, she saw them, her father and Jacob, emerging from the new shed. Both were clad in heavy coats and work gloves, breath puffing in the cold air. John was pointing at something on the engine of a new planter, and Jacob was nodding, leaning in to look. John said something, and Jacob laughed, a full, easy sound that carried on the crisp air. He clapped a hand on John's shoulder, and her father didn't shrug it off. He just nodded, a faint smile on his own weathered face. The sight made something warm and solid settle in Lily's chest. Her mother bustled out of the house, wiping her hands on her apron. "You're here. Come in. It's freezing." But her eyes were on the two men by the shed, her expression one of profound contentment. Later, Mary insisted on a photo by the new shed, for the Christmas card, and they all huddled together, John and Mary in the middle, Lily tucked beside her mother, and Jacob standing tall beside John. It wasn't a stiff, formal portrait. It was a family picture, full of easy smiles and the comfortable lean of people who belong. On Christmas Eve, as twilight painted the sky in shades of lavender and deep blue, Lily pulled on her boots and coat. Jacob was waiting for her on the porch, a shadow against the golden light from the windows. He wasn't wearing a suit. He wore a worn, familiar flannel under his winter coat, the same one from their first meeting, she realized with a start. Some threads were fraying at the cuff. "Walk?" he asked, his voice soft. She nodded, and they fell into step, their boots sinking into the fresh, quiet snow. They walked past the barn, past the new shed, toward the old boundary line where a massive, ancient oak tree stood sentinel, its bare branches etched against the darkening sky. It was the tree from the photograph Jacob had given her mother. He stopped beneath its sprawling limbs. "This was his spot, wasn't it? Your grandfather's." "Yes," Lily whispered, the memory of the photo vivid. Jacob turned to face her. The playful CEO, the earnest partner, the respectful Jake, all those facets were present. But here, in the cold quiet, he was simply Jacob, a man profoundly, humbly in love. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, simple box carved from rich, dark wood. Her heart, for a wild second, leapt to a frantic rhythm. But the box was all wrong for a ring. It was too small, too rustic. He opened the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of raw, cream-colored silk, wasn't a diamond. It was a single, modern key. And beside it, a neatly folded square of thick, handmade paper. "Lily," he began, his breath a cloud between them. "This key is for the apartment next door to yours in Brooklyn. I bought it." She blinked, stunned. "You bought the apartment next to mine?" "I did." He took a steadying breath, his blue eyes serious in the dim light. "Not to pressure you to live together, not to assume anything, but because this past year, flying between Chicago, New York, and here, the best part of every month has been the days and nights I got to spend near you. The mornings we argued over coffee, the evenings we worked in silence in your studio, The times you kicked me out because you needed space to create. He took the key and the folded paper, holding them out to her. So, the key is for you. To use or not. The apartment is yours. A studio, an office, a guest room for your parents. Whatever you want it to be. My place is in Chicago, but my heart, it wants to be wherever you are, on your terms. Hands trembling, Lily took the key. It was cool and solid. She unfolded the paper. It wasn't a legal document. It was a hand-drawn, beautifully illustrated deed. At the top, it read, Deed of Trust. Below, in elegant script, were clauses. The bearer of this key holds unconditional right to space, solitude, and silence. The undersigned promises to always knock first, and to bring good coffee. This agreement recognizes that love is not possession, but privileged proximity. It is renewed daily, by choice. At the bottom, he had signed it simply, Jacob, yours, if you'll have me. Tears, hot and sudden, blurred the careful ink. She looked from the paper to his face, which was etched with vulnerability and hope. This wasn't a proposal that boxed her in. It was an invitation to build a life side by side, with doors left open. It was the most Jacob thing he could have done. Practical, heartfelt, giving her everything while demanding nothing. A laugh escaped her, watery and joyful. She clutched the key and the deed to her chest. The apartment next door? Do you have any idea how much Mrs. Gilroy complains about her cat? A slow, relieved smile broke across his face. I'm prepared to negotiate with Mrs. Gilroy. And her cat. Lily stepped forward, closing the small distance between them. The snow crunched under her boots. She reached up, her cold fingers touching his cheek, tracing the line of his jaw she knew so well. Jacob Thorne, she whispered, her voice full of love and wonder. You are absolutely impossible. She leaned in, her lips meeting his in the cold, sweet air under her grandfather's tree. The wooden key held tightly in her hand. Not a lock, but an opening to a future they would choose, together, every single day.
What did you guys think of this story? I'm totally hooked. Is that perfect mix of drama, a crazy fast pace, and that rented day who's actually a billionaire twist we all love. If you're into stories like this, with secrets and high-stake romance, let me know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more. Thank you very much.